Welcome to Dose of Social, your recipe for social media success. I'm Lindsay Mauk,
I'm Kayla Pearlstein.
and this is Dose of
Social.
Social.
We are super excited to have Amber Gilormo on this episode. If you know her online, she's also known as the boutique lawyer, your online business and trademark attorney. So, Amber, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. I love all things small business and everything online business. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah. So I was telling Lindsay, I found you because I follow you on social media and you always share such great tips. And I've purchased some of your templates and I thought that your expertise would be great for our listeners. So we're really excited to dive in.
Yeah, this is going to be cool. Glad to connect from social. It's so crazy meeting everybody on like Instagram. That's the one platform. I'm like an elder millennial. Like that's my platform, you know?
Yeah.
Shout out to the millennials.
I know, right? Yes, but it's good to meet people like offline, you know?
Yeah, definitely. So we'd love if you could give us a little intro about yourself. Just tell our listeners who you are and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, I am so excited to be here, but also I am an online business and trademark attorney. I've been practicing for this will be my 16th year doing the legal things. And originally I started kind of more trial work. I worked, it was crazy. When you start and you're trying to figure out, just like going to college, like what kind of lawyer do I want to be, right? I thought to myself, I absolutely want to be an intellectual property lawyer. And I did a whole internship with Georgia Lawyers for the Arts. And it was awesome. It was so cool. But then when I went to go find a job, I couldn't find a job in intellectual property. So I ended up working for a general practice firm and I started doing like contract, criminal defense, and like some personal injury. And so I actually did personal injury law for a long time before transitioning back to the business side of things, helping more small businesses kind of just start and scale their brands from the ground up. I call it like leveling my karmic load. I spent so many years suing businesses for just like accidents, things they did wrong, that I'm like, okay, well, let me help you out a little bit and tell you what you did wrong and how we fix that and, you know, kind of like the right way to do business. Yeah, I went through a kind of a sticky like business partnership-ish arrangement on myself on my own. And like that kind of really put me onto wanting to help business owners kind of figure out the friction points better so that they can, you know, not have to deal with all the stress that goes along with legal problems.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great. And it's nice that you started out with like general business practice experience too. I think that's always a great place to start because I think a lot of law becomes very specialized, right?
Yeah.
In different
Yeah.
areas.
Do y'all know that phrase? What's it called? Like, gosh, normally I butcher phrases, but it's like a jack of all trades is a master of none.
Yeah.
And everybody
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
stops there, but it's like oftentimes better than a master of one, right?
Mhm.
And so I really, really think that like I like the full phrase. I like the full version of the phrase because even as a small business owner, like you're wearing all the hats all the time, right? You literally have to be a jack of all trades and you
Mhm.
really have to know everything or at least be able to issue spot in order to operate your business well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I also have to know how to troubleshoot if my chair is not working at my desk, right? Like, I don't have
Exactly.
someone in IT or, a ergonomic, consultant to come and check out my desk situation, right, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So, Amber, if someone is just starting their online business or looking to get started, what legal protections would you recommend they set up first? Like, what is your checklist
Yeah.
for business owners as they're getting started?
Yeah, this is like the $1,000,000 question. It's the question I get the most, like, where do I start, right? Because when you're starting a business, it's so much all at once that the legal stuff usually gets put to the side, right? You're like, let me figure out my marketing. I want to do my cute branding and like all those fun things. And my advice is probably a little rogue for the legal industry. I would say make sure your idea can make you money. Proof of concept first, because if you spend all this money on this legal stuff and you don't make any money, you're kind of out a bunch of money. So I like to see like practical thought process behind the business first before I like tell people to go do things. But the first legal step you take is to get like a legal entity. Whether that's, anything other than just doing business as yourself. A lot of people start like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But once you start growing your brand, you start getting like a bigger, almost like lens on your business, which increases your risk. And that's the best way to insulate yourself is by having something like an LLC, for example, a limited liability company that separates your business's debts and responsibilities from your personal assets and your earning power. It's probably the best legal thing you can do for your business from a protection standpoint. And then there's so much else I could like rattle off. But normally I start with that. And then we move to protecting like money makers. So that can look like your brand name. It could also look like your contracts. Anything, if you have like a lot of clients, you need to make sure you have really good contracts in place. So usually we protect ourselves first and then protect our money makers. So in that general order.
So speaking of contracts, when does a solopreneur actually need a contract and what kind?
Yeah. Solopreneur, go get your contract today. If you are doing business with clients, you needed it before you started. But you want to make sure that you have a solid like client services agreement. That could look like if you're doing copywriting, it would be a copywriter contract or copywriting contract. It could be a design contract, it could be something like that. If you are selling like digital products or if you have a website, then your website policies become really important. That would be just the simple stuff like a privacy policy, a terms of use if you're a service provider, or a terms of purchase if you are a like product seller, like a digital product seller or a e-com seller. So those kind of core agreements protect any kind of interaction point you have with a customer or a client. Because isn't that like where we've seen things go wrong normally? Like people will either ask for a refund or they want to terminate. And like that's how you protect yourself if something goes wrong. But it also goes a long way to like setting the expectation for your service or the sale with your client. You want to be able to set like, I don't know. I think of it as like my governing agreement. Like this is how it's going to work. Like as we work together, right? It reinforces that a good contract can also be like a really good bad guy in a situation if something goes wrong. You're like, oh, the contract says this, right? It kind of like takes it off of you personally. So, yeah, I would say start with your client agreement or any like contract that governs like where you have a customer, and then move on to website policies.
Yeah, I've set up a lot of e-commerce stores for our clients over the years, and that is the one thing where I'll say, "Do you have a privacy policy written? Do you have terms of use?" No.
Yeah.
Where does one get one of these things? So, yeah, so at like, what would your recommendation be to someone who's starting out and kind of knows they need these things? Like, would you I think a lot of times there is this instinct to look up a free template online,
Yeah.
right?
Or use
Um,
ChatGPT?
Yeah.
or use a
Well,
ChatGPT drafted one. So what's the difference between doing something like that and investing in a properly drafted one?
yeah. I feel like AI is the elephant in the legal room like all the time now because everybody used to get contracts from Google. Now everybody gets contracts from ChatGPT all the time. So a bunch of lawyers have been like fined essentially and disciplined because they have used like ChatGPT's or other generative AIs raw output like or the output that it gives them without looking at it, sent it on and filed this stuff with the court, whether it's like a motion, a brief, pleading, and then they get in trouble because the stuff that's in there is totally made up. Like the case sites are false; they don't even exist. And so we can't just trust like what generative AI gives us because it looks good. Like it's fooling lawyers, it's fooling legal professionals. Like that's their whole job, right? And I get why people do it because like we're under the side note here, the legal profession has like horrible mental health ratings. Like we're like one of those professions where everybody's got problems, right? Because we're under so much stress and it's just like kind of a cesspool of things. But I see why people like will rely on it, and even just like to knock it out, to get it off their desk, because it's so easy and you feel confident about it. But at the end of the day, like unless you know what's in there and you understand the output, you can't really solely rely on that. So I would recommend that people use, if you're starting out, especially, at least use like a lawyer drafted template. Of course, I sell those, right? To full disclosure, I do, but I would say start with that, especially one that's geared towards your industry. Because if you're an independent contractor, which like most, I'll just use service providers as an example, like designers, copywriters, those kinds of people, you are an independent contractor normally if you're being hired by a person. And you can go to like, I don't know, LegalZoom, right, for example, and get an independent contractor agreement. But unless it's customized for your industry, meaning thinking about like the normal things that you would run into as a professional, it's probably not going to serve you that well. So backing up, I do like to use AI for business to an extent, especially for legal, to help you issue spot, because that's maybe the hardest part of running an online business or just a small business in general, is like, where do I start? What do I need? And I use AI for that. Like if I'm thinking about, especially if I'm like, I have AI legal tools now, like I have subscriptions, but I will go and I'll say like, what's required for this kind of entity in this space, right? And then it'll give me some checklists. And I love that for online business owners too. Like if you're trying to figure out like, oh, what kind of agreement do I need here? What should I think about? Especially if like maybe you're an influencer or you get your first brand deal, or maybe somebody's reached out to you to like do a paid post, right? Um, Looking at AI to like issue spot can help you decide whether it's something you can navigate yourself, or if you need to like, okay, maybe now's the time to bring in like a lawyer, or maybe now's the time to go get this. So I do like AI for that, but not for drafting contracts.
And that was going to be my next question of at what point do you think a business should consider hiring a lawyer rather than doing it themselves?
You know, I would say most people who hire me have gone the template route, and they've been in business probably like 2 years, I would say, on average. And then they've seen somebody go through something that they want to avoid, whether that's like somebody getting sued for trademark infringement, or they saw somebody get like hit with a bunch of chargebacks from a like mad client and they don't want to have to deal with that. So they're kind of already got their toes in. As soon as you feel like you want to keep this business, that you want to grow this business, I think that's a great time to look at bumping up the foundation, right? So making sure that you're beefing up, not bumping up, beefing up your foundation. So making sure like your legal stuff is in order. And for most people, especially newer businesses, it looks like in the year 1 to 2 range, you're like, okay, maybe I should talk to a lawyer. And the first entry point, I would say, is scheduling a consultation with one, because all lawyers are different. A lot of people who will come and ask me for help or want me to look at their contracts have already tried to like DIY. Sometimes they even have met with local lawyers. And they're like, they don't understand my business, right? They're not familiar with online business, which is very different than like brick and mortar. And so it's just, you need to make sure you find the right fit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, as you are a business owner over time, like for example, I've been in business for 13 years now. I've learned things over the years that I want to make sure I include in my contracts going
Yeah.
forward, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of it is either from something I saw of a friend who owns an agency that had this happen to them, or this experience happened to me and I want to protect myself from it in the future.
Mhm.
So you learn over time, I think, as a service provider, like what specific clauses in contracts would be beneficial to you in your business going forward. But for someone getting
Yeah.
started, like what are your recommendations on specific clauses that a service provider should make sure to include in an initial contract?
So, service providers are unique because they all do different things, right? So, normally, the I think most important parts of a contract for a service provider, which is kind of like a reframe, because all the stuff that goes in a contract is important. Like even those like miscellaneous clauses at the end, like some people are tempted to delete, like, oh, this sounds too legal. I don't need this. Like that happens. Um, Plenty of
Yep.
people will do that. I would say the most important stuff are the things that govern what you create for your clients. So, like The legal phrase is intellectual property, but that's really just what you create. And we want to talk about like who owns it, when do those rights transfer, can I still use the stuff that I create in my own portfolio for my own marketing? Like that stuff is really important. So generally the most important stuff is like what I create and who owns it. The
Mhm.
easier stuff that's also really important are going to be things like payments, right? We want it to be spelled out like what happens when somebody doesn't pay. Can we
Mhm.
cancel our contract? And if we cancel, like, do we get all of our money that the person had contracted, for us, or do we have to refund, or do we just both go our separate ways? So, payment terms, intellectual property, cancellation, those are like really the big ones. Timeline can be important for your clients. Like if they're hiring you, sometimes clients really want to see timeline stuff inside of a contract. I'm on the fence with that actually. Like sometimes I think it's good to be in the contract. Sometimes it's better served in a proposal, with language that says like we need to be flexible as needed. Like that's that type of language is going to be more beneficial to the actual service provider, right? But those I think were the main kind of three buckets for me when I'm thinking of like what is most important for a service provider.
Yeah, those are good ones, and, like, for me, for example, when I'm writing when I'm doing my contracts for clients, I usually include the proposal as an Exhibit A,
Hmm.
Mhm.
but not necessarily, like, listing it out in the deliverables or anything like that. And, I mean, Kayla, I'd love to hear from you too about, like, different aspects that you make sure you include in your service provider contracts, but from my perspective as a business owner, like, one thing I always make sure is that there is um, some sort of, like, 30-day notice or 60-day notice just to give us some predictability in the business, right? Because it can be hard as a retainer-based business if someone just all of a sudden says, "Okay, I'm done," and,
Hmm.
we're gonna stop work tomorrow, right? That can be tough as a service provider, so giving yourselves that 30-day notice or 60-day notice or whatever that is. I always think payment terms too are super important, like, you will receive your invoice on the 1st of the month, and we pay net 15, we expect you to pay within net 15 and things like that. Just outlining it all initially too, I think is great. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
think, like, everyone's different, right?
and Lindsay, you actually brought up a point that I guess I kind of have a question around for you, Amber, but our contracts also have terms, so we do 30 days notice. Um, and I've heard obviously from myself and then other people that I work with that a lot of times clients, I don't know if they don't read the contract or they just think they can cancel at any time, but they don't usually abide by the 30-day notice. And so one thing I think we're going to start doing is adding like where they have to initial by the terms just to triple confirm. We've talked about it. It's in your welcome email. It's in the contract, but you also initialed. And so we need that 30-day notice. But in my experience, a lot of times they just think they can cancel the contract at any time or not pay. And so then, it becomes more of a hassle than it might need to be.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's probably two main reasons, especially if you have an ongoing client, why they cancel, right? One, like they're unhappy with the services.
Mhm.
Two, it's a cash flow problem for them.
Yep.
So thinking about number two, because in number one, we're going to be more likely to bend the service providers because we probably, I mean, if something's gone wrong on our end, sometimes it's going to be a crazier client. Like sometimes we're going to be more willing to bend just to get out of like a toxic client
Right.
relationships because those exist. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
If it's a cash flow thing for your client, like you can think of like why. Sometimes I think going back to them, and sympathizing on that same like, hey, it's in our contract, right? But like, it's in our contract because we also need to be mindful of our businesses. I wouldn't use the word cash flow, but I would use something else, like something to that extent. I think you just used the correct phrase,
Yeah.
Lindsay, and now it's blanking out of my head.
Predictability.
Yes, predictability. But it's in here. It's in our contract, and like we'll turn it. Our thanks for this. It will we terminate or the project ends on this date, right? So you kind of get in front of it. But something else your contract should do is outline, because I'm sure you at least y'all are probably familiar with the concept of like arbitration clauses, right? So
Mhm.
where if a dispute happens, Now, if there's an arbitration clause in there, it's also binding on us as a service provider, right? We also have to submit to arbitration. We want to have a carve out for being able to like send accounts to collections, possibly file things like injunctions for other things if people are defaming each other. Um, but we want to make sure there's a carve out there to allow us to go to collections and do all these other things as B2Bs, business to business, which is usually in this space, happens a lot. To be able to collect on those debts. But I think of a contract. People will break contracts. There's a contract, they're going to break it. The
Yeah.
contracts are there for a reason because people break them. Um, Contracts are a deterrent object in business. It's meant to deter behavior. We want to allow people and set those expectations, but people are still going to be people at the end of the day, and they're going to push those boundaries. So if we have good contracts, they look professional, we've been professional throughout, they're less likely to break them. But if it's a larger like retainer client, if it makes financial sense, then we enforce the contracts through things like litigation, arbitration, those kinds of things, collections. But I do think of contracts first and foremost as a deterrent. It sets the tone for your relationship, and hopefully people will follow it without you having to take that additional like enforcement step. So,
Yeah, no one wants to have to take that step.
yeah, it's a pain. Like it's stressful even on the business side.
And it's costly too. I
Yes.
mean, I have been in situations where I have had to collect on
Mhm.
unpaid invoices, and it financially it's not great, right? Because then you have to basically throw good money at and hope that you're gonna get this money in return that you're
Yeah.
owed, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's like the added consumer protection aspect now. So a lot of states have enacted their own consumer protection laws that govern things like ongoing retainers. So if you're ever at that like enforcement stage, a client wants to cancel, you're like, hey, but this is thousands of dollars, that you owe us. I think that's also a great time to go consult with a lawyer who's licensed in the state where your business is so that they can help you navigate, like make sure that what you're doing is in accordance like with your states and local laws too.
So, how can small business owners protect themselves before any issues like this even happen? We kinda touched on this a little bit, but
So any so that I understand your question, before any like disputes with clients happen, or
yeah. I feel like we kinda touched on this one already, we probably
it's
don't.
really like making sure you have a good professional kind of intake process, I would say. So and client qualification process too. So if you're a service provider, like making sure that what's the standard? This is kind of maybe too in depth, but I would say that if you have a client, somebody, you need to make sure they're a good fit, right? That's like year two of business when we care more about the fit of the client as opposed to the client bringing in revenue.
Yeah.
But that can go a long way to protecting you as a business owner too. It's just having a good qualification process, making sure your intake and your proposal all looks like professional, you're gathering the information, and that you do have that solid contract in place that solidifies like the arrangement between you and them. Also, like if you are an online service provider or like a digital product seller or an online coach or business coach, and you're doing terms and conditions and not like client contracts where you're signing them, having those other policies in place and making sure your checkouts are really solid is important.
Yeah.
I feel like that could probably be a whole other topic on its own, but there is a right and wrong way to display policies like on your website.
Right. Yeah, I always say that the proposal process is where you learn a lot about your client and, how the future relationship is going to be, right? It's
Mhm.
a lot like dating, right? It's
Yeah.
like you're learning about how you're gonna interact with these people with this particular you're gonna learn how you're interacting with the clients. So,
Yeah.
I think that's great
That's
feedback.
actually, like, so incredibly true. So, I recently moved my intake process into the year of 2026. So, I have been manually sending invoices, manually sending contracts for all of my practice, all throughout the practice of law. And it's been kind of a crazy now that I see it, so I've moved from like just doing everything manually through like 3 different systems. Literally, it was becoming a headache because I was becoming like higher volume in my clients. And I was like missing invoices and doing all these crazy things. But I migrated to HoneyBook, which I know everybody has an opinion about HoneyBook, but for me, like I can now see like the client journey a lot better, right? And so who is just like, I'll send them a proposal and they take 10 minutes and they're like, proposal signed, invoice paid, done, right? Versus a client who like opens it, and then they open it for like 6 more times and then they like will sign a contract and then take 2 weeks to pay an invoice. And you do like even just that process, you do really learn a lot about a client, through that
Mhm.
process. And I think that's such a smart observation. And like that onboarding process, if you have it together, you can really learn a lot. And it tells me what to expect right down the road. Is like we all have habits, and so we can probably expect the same kind of delay. Make sure your auto pay is turned on.
Yeah. I
Love
want
autopay.
love
Yes.
I
Shout
wanted
out
to
to
love
auto pay.
HoneyBook, but it was a little overwhelming for me, so I couldn't figure it out, but I've heard great things.
Yeah, I had somebody help me, and it was a fantastic process. I could not have done it without her. So, Carly Whitaker.
So,
Nice.
what would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions about contracts in the online business space?
I think that one and done, like, okay, got a contract, I'm good, right? I think that that's kind of like not, it's not even just an online business space, but like we put up a privacy policy in 2022 and we never look at it again, right? So, or we get our client contract and we get it lawyer reviewed in 2022 and we never look at it again. And then if you're not regularly updating your contracts, you're probably doing your business a disservice. I have run one ad for like the entirety of my online business. I actually just like stopped it because I was like, I bet people are getting ad fatigue. Like they probably see the same ad a million times from me. I took it off, but it was something pretty simple. That's like an invalid privacy policy is just as bad as not having one because laws will change, right? So we need to make sure that we are updating those things at least on an annual basis, like whether it's during your planning, um, and just going in and doing a basic update on our policies is really important, especially on our client contracts. It's at least annual. You can think of like what kind of issues did I have this year with clients? Did somebody like stop? Just think about what happened and then think about how can my contract help support me if there's opportunity for that, and adjust it accordingly. Also, like what kind of new tools am I using this year, right? And sometimes those need to be in our contracts, especially AI tools. If we're using it for creative output, we need to make sure we're telling our clients, and like this is big, bold legal information here. We need to make sure we're telling our clients there might be intellectual property ownership restrictions regarding that. So, like, if I'm using AI to create something, I can tell you can use it in your business, but I probably didn't have full copyright ownership in it anyways. And that becomes important if we want to like enforce other people from copying our content. So, for example, like if I use this AI to write a sales page and I'm a copywriter, I really need to tell my client that, because if somebody goes in and copies their copy and creates like a duplicate, it happens all the time. If somebody's like, oh,
Yep.
I saw my sales copy on your page, I'm going to send you a cease and desist. Well, you can only do that to the extent you actually own that output. If it's written by AI, nobody owns the output, according to the current like US law in the US. It's free for anybody to use almost. If you edit it, your edits are something you own, but not just the output, right? So we need to make sure that we're disclosing the use of AI. I would say it's just good business practice. There's not a particular law, but it's just good practice.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah, we've actually talked about that, on Dose of Social before, just with not
Great.
in regards to legal or, like, website language, but for social media too. Like, if you like, it'd be nice to be able to regulate the use of AI a little bit more because, like, sometimes my kids see these videos online of, like, the dog walking like this, and they're like, "Do dogs really do that, mommy?" "No, no, 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 that's AI."
Isn't that so weird? Like, it's so weird. It's AI generated. I'm like, why even make this video? It's like the stupidest video I've ever seen. I don't know.
I know. Well, it's for views, right? It's like
Yeah,
they're just trying to get views, so
yeah, ridiculous. But I totally agree. obviously that it should be labeled. It should be labeled for many reasons. I think that's like one of the big AI generated output is one of the big emerging areas for legal. So legal's always like 5 years behind, always. It takes us a long time in the legal world for our regulators and our people who make the laws to even understand what the new is, like to even understand it. It happened with like social media, right now. Who is it? Zuckerberg is kind of like on trial for like social media addiction cases, and so he just in the midst of trial right now. And he has also testified before Congress about this kind of stuff, and some of those questions like our lawmakers would ask are just like so antiquated. You can tell they have no idea what social media is. Like they don't understand how it works. Like, right. So we're seeing the same thing with AI. Like they're finally understanding, like, hey, AI is here to stay. So let me figure out what it is. And then we're going to create some laws around it. So there are some pending laws that have been introduced to require AI labeling and that kind of stuff. But who knows if they're going to pass? They've just been introduced. It takes so long for those like things to get enacted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess time will tell, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those who are listening to this episode in a year that is not 2026, you'll have
Yeah.
to chime in and let us know.
Yeah.
Well, Amber, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing so much great information with our audience. What are 3 takeaways from this episode that we've covered that you think would be best to leave our listeners with?
So I think the first takeaway that anybody listening to should kind of make note of would be that legal can be treated like it can feel like a big roadblock in our business. It can feel like this big overwhelming thing. But it is also something that can go a really long way to making you feel professional, look professional, and like your clients interact with you on a more professional level if you have it together. So it's definitely something that I can see why people put off because it's a lot, but it is so helpful in the long run. And then I think number 2, the place to start is going to be what protects me right now. That could look like forming an LLC if you're at that, level, or it can be something as simple as getting a good contract in place to protect you and set that level of professionalism with your clients. And then last, I think it would be once you have those basics in place, consider your like digital footprint, your website, and whether or not that is protected. Would say that's something we didn't like totally get into. It probably could be its own episode, as you have all those things about like privacy laws, cookies, pop-ups, ADA compliance, but your website is another big to do for a business owner in terms of legal protection. So hope that kind of helps.
That was great. Thank you so much, Amber, and it sounds like we definitely need to have you back on Dose of Social for a part 2
Yes.
because I think that all of those things that you just mentioned are absolutely necessary and would love to dive deeper
Yeah,
in
I'm happy to do
at
it.
a
I
later
think
time.
the accessibility stuff is something I get so many questions on. People are like, do I need an accessibility statement? Like, where can I get one? And you don't need one. I think that's something we can talk about.
Yep, definitely. I can talk to you about that a little bit more offline.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Amber, thank you so much for joining
Yes,
us
thank
today.
you.
Yeah.
If
Thanks for having me.
listeners want to find you on social media, I know Kayla mentioned it at the beginning, but where can everyone find you?
So on Instagram, if you want to hang out, I am at the boutique lawyer. That is the only platform I am active on. So don't come looking for me on TikTok. I'm embarrassed. I have not updated my account there in forever. It's like old videos. But Instagram and Facebook, I also have an account there, but I would say Instagram.
Well, thank you so much, Amber, for joining us today. Looking forward to continuing our conversation because we're friends on social media. So can't wait to see all the great content that comes in the coming weeks and months. And thanks so much for listening to Dose of Social.
Yeah.
Bye.